Viewer discretion is advised. This documentary contains disturbing real-life events, psychological discussions, and historical crime details that may be unsuitable for some audiences. The story of Ed Gein is one of the most unsettling cases in American history, and while we avoid graphic descriptions, some content may still be distressing. Please watch with care. Plainfield, Wisconsin, 1957, a small farming town where everyone knew each other, or thought they did. What no one realized was that on the edge of town, hidden behind a line of bare trees, one man's home was becoming a museum of horror. His name was Ed Gein, a quiet, awkward handyman known for odd jobs and strange habits. But before the nation learned his name, before headlines called him the Butcher of Plainfield, Gein was just another farm boy in rural America, and like all monsters, his story began long before the crimes. Edward Theodore Gein was born in 1906 in La Crosse County, Wisconsin. His parents, George and Augusta Gein, raised Ed and his older brother Henry on an isolated farm miles from the nearest town. Isolation wasn't accidental. Augusta wanted it that way. Deeply religious, domineering, and fanatically moral, Augusta saw the world as a place of sin and temptation. She preached that all women, except herself, were instruments of the devil. She taught her sons that desire was evil, that people outside their home were corrupt, and that salvation came only through obedience. George, her husband, was the opposite. An alcoholic, beaten down by failure and dependence on his wife. For the boys, the farm became a prison, ruled by their mother's voice, her anger, and her scripture. Augusta limited the boys' contact with the outside world. They went to school, came straight home, and spent the rest of their lives on the farm, cleaning, tending livestock, and reading from the Bible. Other children noticed Ed's strange mannerisms, the nervous laughter, the soft, high-pitched voice, the way he stared just a little too long. Teachers described him as polite but detached, unable to connect, always watching, always alone. Inside his mind, the seeds of obsession were already taking root. Stories of damnation, sin, and the power of his mother's voice would become the only truths he knew. By the 1940s, Ed was an adult in body but still a child in his mother's world. His brother Henry began to question Augusta's dominance, telling friends that Ed's devotion to her was unnatural. In 1944, the brothers were burning brush on the family property. The fire spread unexpectedly, and when it was finally under control, Ed reported his brother missing. Henry was later found dead, face down. The official cause was heart failure due to smoke inhalation, but the circumstances were strange. He had no burns, and the area where he was found was barely scorched. There was no investigation, no autopsy. The case was ruled accidental, and Ed Gein was left alone with the one person who had shaped his entire existence, Augusta. A year later, Augusta suffered a series of strokes. Ed cared for her obsessively, feeding her, washing her, and spending every waking moment by her side. But in December 1945, she died. Her death shattered what little stability Ed had. He boarded up her bedroom and the sitting room she used, leaving them untouched, preserved like a shrine. The rest of the farmhouse decayed around him. Without her, he was completely alone. In Plainfield, Ed was known as shy, dependable, even harmless. He did small jobs for neighbors, babysat local kids, and attended church. But at night, his mind grew darker. He read pulp horror magazines, anatomy books, and newspaper stories about the recently deceased. The isolation had become something else, a breeding ground for obsession and delusion, and soon curiosity turned into compulsion. In 1954, the town would begin to notice missing people. What they didn't know was that inside Ed Gein's farmhouse, behind locked doors and boarded windows, a secret world was being built piece by piece. By the winter of 1957, Plainfield was a place that rarely made the news. But that November, a local woman vanished, and with her disappearance, the town's quiet reputation would shatter. Bernice Worden ran the local hardware store, a family business everyone in Plainfield knew. On the morning of November 16th, her son Frank returned from a hunting trip to find the shop empty. The cash register was open. Bloodstains led toward the door. The last sales receipt in the ledger told investigators everything: the name Ed Gein. Police were familiar with Ed, odd but helpful, a man who did repairs for neighbors. That afternoon, deputies drove the frozen road toward his isolated farmhouse. The Gein property stood alone, surrounded by barren fields and broken fences. When officers knocked, there was no answer. They entered cautiously through a side door. What they found inside was unlike anything the state had ever seen. Every room was cluttered with newspapers, tools, and rotting furniture. The air was stale and cold. In the kitchen, detectives made the discovery that confirmed their worst fears: evidence of a violent crime and objects made from human remains. The farmhouse was sealed off as a crime scene that night. Outside, neighbors stood behind police lines, watching as officers carried boxes and evidence bags into the cold. Ed Gein was found later that evening at a neighbor's house, quietly drinking coffee. He offered no resistance. He was taken to the Waushara County Sheriff's Office for questioning. When interrogated, Gein spoke softly, often referring to his mother as if she were still alive. Detectives described his demeanor as childlike and detached from reality. Over the next 24 hours, he began to reveal the extent of his actions. How he had robbed graves from local cemeteries and used the remains in bizarre ritual attempts to recreate his mother's presence. He confessed to 2 murders: Mary Hogan in 1954 and Bernice Worden in 1957. Investigators spent days cataloging the contents of the house. They described it as a nightmare workshop frozen in time, a glimpse into a mind fractured by loss, isolation, and psychosis. Psychiatrists later noted that Gein's grief for his mother had transformed into delusion. He believed he could bring her back by wearing or becoming her image. It wasn't a lust for killing. It was a desperate attempt to erase loneliness through madness. Plainfield became a media circus. Reporters flooded the town, calling Gein the Butcher of Plainfield. His name became synonymous with rural horror, an ordinary man who had hidden unimaginable darkness behind a neighborly smile. In 1958, Ed Gein was declared legally insane and sent to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Walpen, Wisconsin. He spent the rest of his life there, reportedly quiet and compliant, reading books and helping in the kitchen. The farmhouse was destroyed by fire before it could be turned into a tourist attraction, a final act that many locals saw as a mercy. What remained was the question that still haunts criminologists and psychologists alike. How does a man become Ed Gein? Is it madness born in the mind, or nurtured through a life of fear, control, and grief? One truth is clear: Evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind a polite smile and a lonely farm on the edge of town.
Mr. Gein, the court has reviewed the findings and the testimony in detail. You will stand and listen to the sentence of this court without interruption.
Yes, sir.
You are hereby committed to the state hospital for the criminally insane.
I am.
In 1958, the story of Ed Gein reached the courts, and the world watched in disbelief. Could the quiet handyman from Plainfield really understand what he had done? The proceedings were short. Prosecutors presented Gein's confession and the physical evidence recovered from his home. But psychiatrists testified that Ed Gein lived in a world detached from reality, a mind fractured by grief, isolation, and psychotic delusion. On January 6, 1958, the court found him legally insane. Instead of prison, he was committed to Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. Inside the hospital, Gein became a model patient, quiet, polite, even helpful. Staff described him as gentle, almost grateful to have routine and care. He spent his days reading magazines, assisting in the kitchen, and tending small chores. There were no outbursts, no signs of violence. It was as if the storm had finally settled. Doctors continued to study him, noting an almost childlike innocence when he spoke of his mother, never referring to her death, only saying she went away. His fixation had never truly ended. In 1968, after a decade of treatment, doctors believed Gein was competent to stand trial. The court revisited the case of Bernice Worden. This time, Gein pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Judge Robert Gallmar agreed with the psychiatric findings. Gein was once again found insane and returned to the institution, this time for the rest of his natural life. Ed Gein spent the next 15 years at Mendota Mental Health Institute. He rarely received visitors and showed little interest in the outside world. On July 26, 1984, Ed Gein died of respiratory failure at the age of 77. His burial at Plainfield Cemetery was unremarkable, a simple grave beside his mother's. Over time, even the headstone was stolen and defaced. What remained was a patch of grass and a name whispered in every horror story that followed. The discovery in 1957 did more than shock Wisconsin. It rewrote the language of horror. Authors and filmmakers began to draw from the case of Ed Gein to understand society's fascination with the grotesque. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, 1960, introduced Norman Bates, the soft-spoken man ruled by his dead mother's voice. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974, imagined a rural family consuming the legacy of Gein's crimes. The Silence of the Lambs, 1991, echoed his obsession with transformation and identity. Each story transformed the real horror of Plainfield into myth, a warning about the fragility of the human mind and the dangers of isolation. Psychiatrists and criminologists continue to study Ed Gein as a rare case of psychotic fixation. Unlike most serial killers, Gein was not driven by greed, revenge, or thrill. His crimes grew from delusion, a belief that he could resurrect the one person he loved and feared the most. He embodied a unique kind of madness, obsession rooted in loss, shaped by isolation, and fueled by religious guilt. His life forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Monsters are not born in the shadows. They are shaped by their surroundings, by neglect, by control, and by silence. Today, Plainfield is quiet again. The farm is gone, the ashes long scattered, but the name Ed Gein still lingers, not as legend, but as a reminder. Evil can wear an ordinary face, and sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that really happened. This was Ed Gein, the Butcher of Plainfield. Subscribe for more true crime documentaries that uncover the